Hello. I hope you're all as awake as I am.
Or so.
Welcome. What is this panel? Writing for multiple people. My name is Greg Weisman. I have written for comic books going back to Captain Atom and earlier. I've written for television, Gargoyles, Young Justice, others. That's been most of my career is television. I've written, I've written multiple movies, but one actually got made, which was Catwoman Hunted. And I've written 6 novels, 2 based on World of Warcraft, 2 based on Magic the Gathering, and 2 of my own original properties, Reign of the Ghosts, Spirits of Ash and Foam. And most of this material will be available at my table later today. Please feel free to come and buy stuff. As usual, in any panel with me, I have prepared
absolutely nothing.
Thank you. Got it right this time. All right. And
We just needed a good yell at the blue mark. It's not
right. But I will talk, before I open this up to questions, which will be the bulk of the panel, I will talk a little bit about process and the difference between my process and how it differs between different media. And the main point I'm going to make, or the main caveat I want to make, is that if we had, which was what my hope was, we'd have a bunch of different writers up here, not just me. I suggested this panel, but I didn't mean for it to be just me. I thought, there are a lot of great writers. There are other guests who are writers at this con, guests of honor, but also a lot of great writers I know at this con anyway. Somehow I think they got confused and thought I wanted a one-man show here. So anyway, my big caveat is if you talk to any, 5 writers, you probably get 5 different methods, 5 different. So what I'm going to describe is how I work. If that is helpful, useful to you, great. But if you're like, well, that wouldn't work for me, that's cool too. I'm not trying to evangelize for my style. I'm just trying to explicate it. So I use a very high-tech system, very, very high-tech, that involves a bulletin board, push pins, index cards, and Sharpies. And basically, what I do is, any idea I have, any line of dialogue that occurs to me, even if I don't end up using it in the final version, I put those on an index card. And then I move them around until it all sort of works. Now, if I'm writing a comic book, that may be 50, 60 cards because a comic book is somewhere between 20 and 24 pages. Sometimes if you've got a double issue, 32 or something like that. But, so often I can get, depending on how many panels I'm planning per page, I can get an entire page on the card. But the idea isn't to stuff as much as possible onto the card, because what you want is to be able to look at a glance at what the card is. So if you're writing really tiny, then that sort of defeats the purpose. My partner on Young Justice, Brandon Vietti, I taught him this system, and then he said, oh, we can do this on Final Draft. We can do this on the computer. I'm like, no, we can't. He's like, yeah, we can. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Final Draft has this index card function, but it doesn't work. He's like, no, it works fine. I'm like, no, it doesn't work. Because the whole point of this is to be able to look at the big picture and still be able to read the details. So the problem is a unless you're working on a screen the size of your wall, you've either got to shrink it all down to see the big picture, or you've got to blow it up to be able to read the cards. And I'm like, that doesn't work. It defeats the purpose. Like I said, 2 different writers. He's happy with that. I don't understand it. I think he's nuts. Now, my process evolved over time. When I was doing gargoyles in the 90s and my memory was truly excellent, I could write down 1 card per episode, an entire episode. And I'd write down 2 or 3 words, and that would remind me of everything I wanted to do in the episode. As I got older, this actually became a problem, because my memory started to deteriorate, but because it had been so good for so long, I had no note-taking skills at all. And even on gargoyles, with that 1 card per episode, the main reason for that was to be able to remember what order all the episodes was in. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to forget what's in this episode. It was just like, okay, did this one come first, or did this one come first? So as I got older, for example, when we were doing Witch, season 2 of Witch, it would take across a bulletin board, 1 line, 7 or 8 cards across a vertical bulletin board, and then, the next episode, 7 or 8 cards, the next 7 or 8 cards. You can literally track my progress as my mind fades out. Because by the time we got to Young Justice season 4, it was something like 300, 400 cards per episode. Brandon's memory also is horrible. But that's just how he did things. And this became a problem during the pandemic because we're all at home. And I don't know why, but my wife refuses to just wallpaper our entire house with corkboard. It seems short-sighted, but she's not willing. So I had this big table down in our den, which had I could put a couple leaves in it and make it even bigger. And and we could do maybe an act at a time. And I'm sitting there holding up my iPad over the card so Brandon can see it from his house. It was not an ideal system. But, we made do. We did the best we could. Now, when I write a novel, we're talking about thousands of index cards, literally thousands. Again, no corkboard on the wall at home, and I'm not writing my novel for Warner Brothers, so they're not hyped on me taking 6 offices to spread out my cards. So I would spread out the cards on the floor of my home office. But when you're talking about a couple thousand cards, my home office isn't that big. So it's spread out into the living room.
Oh, jeez.
My wife is fairly tolerant. And we have pets, and the problem with pets is that they seem to have no respect for the cards. My wife didn't want me putting push pins into the floor to secure them. So we would close off the doors to my office in the living room for long periods of time, and then she would say, okay, on this date, we're having people over, the cards must be picked up. And of course, I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, the novel won't be done by then. But sure enough, I would go and I would pick up all the cards and carefully clip them together so that they stayed in the correct order, at least the latest iteration of the correct order, right? And people would come over and we would entertain like we were human beings. And then at night, after the people had left, I would spread all the cards out again. This would go on for weeks and weeks and weeks if I'm writing a novel. And the main thing that I think about is units of measure. And that's what really differs for me between the various media, because otherwise the process is very similar for me. I don't really think of, to me it's all just writing. It's all just fiction. It's, it's not like, oh, I'm doing this, so I've got to change my mindset. The main thing that I change is the unit of measure. And what I mean by that is that anything you do as a writer, at least as a commercial writer, that is, you're trying to entertain people and make some money off it, is about keeping their eye, whether it's on a TV screen, a movie screen, a comic book page, a book. You want to hold their eye. You don't want them bored. You don't want them wandering. You don't want them distracted by other things. You want to keep their eye. And so the unit of measure that we work with in a typical episode of Young Justice or Gargoyles is, in the old days, and this is changing because of streaming, but in the old days it was the act. So Gargoyles and the first 2 seasons of Young Justice, and most of the stuff I've done in my career until the last few years, you have Act 1 and a commercial break, Act 2 and a commercial break, Act 3 and the episode's over. It's a 3-act structure. That's called a beginning, middle, and end. It's a pretty basic structure. It's not complicated. And so the unit of measure is the act, because you want to have, you have rising and falling action throughout the process, throughout the act of the episode. But you want to make sure that you end the act on something. It might be literally a cliffhanger. It might be something intriguing, some mystery, something or other, but something that makes them want to stick around through the commercial break. And not just, well, let me see what else is on. You want them intrigued enough that they don't wander, that their eye stays with you. And you can break it down into smaller bits, and we usually do, instead of just act by act, it's scene by scene, okay? And that sort of thing. But fundamentally, the main unit of measure is the act, because you've got to get them to come back after the commercial. I'll get to how streaming has changed that in a second. But in comparison, in a novel, it's the chapter, right? You read a chapter, and you want them, when they get to the end of the chapter, to go, I can't put this down, I got to see what happens next. In the comic book world, for me, it's the page. That every page that I write in a comic book has to tell its own little story. I'm not saying it doesn't end on a cliffhanger, it might end on, again, a note of intrigue, that kind of thing. But the trick for me is I gotta get the reader to want to turn that page. And not because they're like, well, I might as well finish this, but because they actually are engrossed, involved in the story, and they want to, even need to, keep going. So I think of the unit of measure in a comic book, which again ranges generally, well, I mean, even sometimes I just wrote a short Spider-Man story for Black Suit and Blood, which is a Spider-Man series that focuses on Spidey in his black symbiote suit. And that was just a short 10-page story. So even something as short as that, you get from your editor in advance the page count. Marvel recently switched in their monthly books from 22 pages to 20. And that happened to me while I was partway through actually writing. All right, so in terms of the process, I get all the index cards out, and once I feel like they're in the right place, then I just transcribe that into a quick and dirty document. And then from that, I write the script, whether it's a script for a comic book, or the script for television or a movie, for a novel, that becomes sort of the outline, and you write the prose. But when I'm working on comic books, I think in terms of the page. You know, every page needs to be its own unit of measure. That was tricky for me figuring out when I was writing a movie, because a movie is just one piece. And I've really, because of comic books, and because most of my career has been either comic books or television, and then novels, which have chapters, I had a real problem figuring out how to adapt the system to a movie. And I finally sort of settled in on that Catwoman Hunted has sort of a prologue. It's got a 3-act structure that's pretty clear and straightforward, and then it's got an epilogue. And so I broke it down into 5 chunks, basically. And that seemed to work pretty well for me. But it may also explain why that's the only movie I've had produced, I don't know. For me, those are the basics. Again, it's pretty straightforward. It's very, very low tech, but it works. And the thing is, and again, this is more a function of just the fact that I've been doing this now for 41 years. My system is sort of spread, and it's not like I created it. It evolved for me, but other people, it's not like, I mean, tons of shows use index cards and that kind of thing. But the way that I do it is something that writers like Nicole Dubuque and others have learned. And so I started work last November on Transformers Earthspark just as a staff writer, and I got in there and they were using my system. And I had not worked for these guys before, or with them before. I liked them, they were great, but I had not worked with them before. And so I thought, well, maybe this is pretty even more common than I thought it was. But as it turned out, in season 1, Nicole Dubuque was the story editor, and so I had taught Nicole back on Witch years ago, and she taught these guys, and so by the time I'm coming in on this show, they're teaching it to me, I guess, I don't know. So there's something about that circularness to it that I find reassuring. But again, your mileage may vary. If this system works for you, I find it's great because it lets you really break it down into the basic pieces and then assemble those pieces how you need to. Also, and this is really key, I do not throw any cards away, ever. If we decide not to use something that we put up as a card, we do, we take the high-tech Sharpie pen and we do a single line strike through the card, but we leave it in place. Because I can't tell you how many times Brandon and I have sat there and go, we had an idea earlier that didn't seem to work. I feel like it might work. Do you remember what it was? And Brandon would be like, yeah. I don't remember what it was either. And so we've learned that we don't throw anything away. We may not end up using it, but we may go, oh no, yeah, that didn't work over there, but it works great over here. So that's another hard lesson that we learned the hard way, which is that, again, for me, I can no longer trust my memory at all, which is very, very sad, very sad. Again, I was the guy who, anything geek, I had a pretty encyclopedic knowledge of, but that's mostly gone now. I blame parenting.
Oh, man.
Anyway, that's what I got for you. What do you got for me? Yeah, right here. I'll get to everyone.
So, let me try. What was the experience transitioning from writing for television to writing a novel? Because stuff like animation, you've got the animators doing a good chunk of the storytelling based on how the characters express themselves, how they move, and all the action. And now with the novel, all the work has to be done on the words and your powers of description.
Yeah, it was, you know, I started out in high school and college writing prose, and then moved on to comic books and moved on to television. So it wasn't like it was alien to me, but it definitely was an adjustment. I mean, you're sitting there realizing, in a TV show, I write exterior night, and it's just night, and I don't have to describe the night, it's night. But in a novel, yeah, I've got to talk about what phase the moon is in or whatever. You know, I have to describe all these things. I have to use words like music to create a feeling. And in fact, one of the things that makes TV so much fun is that I always have great composers who help set the mood and help create feeling and that kind of thing. And if I'm writing a novel, yeah, not so much. It's sort of on me. One of the things that I've done, which again is also on sale at my table later today, you should really think about buying it, is I did an audiobook for Reign of the Ghosts, and this isn't a standard sort of single narrator just reading the book. This is 20 actors playing 30 roles, including Ed Asner, Brent Spiner, Marina Sirtis, Josh Keaton, and many, many others, Vanessa Marshall, people you know from cartoons and from live action and stuff like that. But it also has sound effects and a full musical score done by Dynamic Music Partners, who scored Young Justice and The Spectacular Spider-Man. And these, it's like a 4-hour movie in your head. And you know, when I wrote Reign of the Ghosts as a novel, I had to sort of try and create a kind of musicality to it because I didn't have actual, in the prose, because I didn't have actual music to fall back on. So it was interesting then to score that. And we had long sort of scoring, what we call spotting sessions, where you sit down with the composers and you say, this is what I'm looking for here, and this is what I'm looking for here. And we do that in television all the time, but it was an interesting process doing that for a novel. The thing that ended up being the bigger challenge for me, so I've done 6 novels, but it's just worked out that I've done 3 sets of 2. And it was always the second novel where that kind of description became more of a challenge. I guess, I mean, it's for you guys to judge whether I did a good job on my writing, but for me, I felt like, thank you, I'll have your money later. You know, I work in the first book, if I've got a character, I'm describing this character, and I work to find just the right words to describe this character, or a location, or whatever. The problem when you do the second book in a series is that you're sitting there going, okay, I gotta describe this character again. Like, in Young Justice, you know, you meet Superboy, and then in the next episode you just see Superboy. You know, you don't need to meet him again. But in a novel, you've got to describe this character again, and I worked really hard in the first book to come up with the perfect words to describe this character, and I can't just use them again. So I've got to, and this happens over and over again. Character comes back in the second book, and I've written 3 second books. And you go to a location you've been to before, or all sorts of stuff like that, and it's like, wow, I've got to describe this stuff again without using the exact same words I used the first time. And that was actually the bigger challenge. Describing it the first time, I had all this freedom and I could do whatever. The second time, I'm sort of, the whole thing that I really liked the first time, I'm cut off from. So how do I do it the second time? So that was a bit of a challenge. Using words to, I mean, I like to think even in, an animation script is not a final product. A movie script is not a final product. Those are blueprints for the final product. So I don't try to make them artful. I don't. Scene description, the description of action is utilitarian. It's as clear as possible for a storyboard artist, for a designer, for all the people who come after. The main thing is clarity above all else. We talked about this at one of the panels the other day. I think Corinne talked about this, where I've read scripts that annoy the hell out of me, where mysterious figure appears in silhouette. I'm like, how's the artist supposed to know? I get it, we don't want the audience to know who that is yet. But if you're drawing the silhouette, how do you know what to draw if you haven't told the artist who is in silhouette? So again, for me, maximum clarity, I'm like, the audience, I will literally write, the audience can't know who this is yet, but it's Damona, or whatever, you know. But a novel, you know, you're being artful. I like to think that I still use music in my writing, in the dialogue of an animation script, in the dialogue of a movie script. Musicality is very important to me in my writing, but I don't use that in scene descriptions in a teleplay or a screenplay. I try to use it in the dialogue, and then obviously if I'm writing prose, or a comic book script is, in that sense, very similar to a teleplay. I want the scene description in a comic book script to be as clear as possible for the artist, the penciler, the colorist. But the dialogue, I still want it to have some rhythm to it, some music, a feel to it. But if I'm writing a novel, that sense of musicality expands to every word on the page. I think I've over-answered the question. Has that ever happened with me before?
No, never.
That's what we get it.
Yeah.
You've mentioned the difference between the various forms for you is basically just one of length. What about when you have to change the medium a work is going to be presented in, like with Reign of the Ghosts, going from being planned originally as an animated series and then turning into a novel series?
Yeah, so that's a specific job, which is adaptation. So, and I've done a lot of adaptation. You know, Spectacular Spider-Man is me basically taking, you know, what, back then, 50 years of Spider-Man comic books and assorted other Spider-Man media and saying, okay, how am I going to create a coherent, cohesive, we had on Spider-Man what we call the 5 C's, coherent, cohesive, classic, I'm forgetting one of the C's.
Contemporary?
Contemporary, yes, thank you, thank you. And iconic, which I know begins with an I, but has a nice hard C in the second letter. And so what I do is, and you know, I've worked with World of Warcraft, Magic the Gathering, the entire DC universe for Young Justice. I've taken projects that began in one medium. Reign of the Ghost was originally developed as an animated series, then it became a novel, then it became an audio play. And so you sit down and you, for me, the key thing is to sort of get down to the core of the characters of the situation, and then build it back up. You know, what is the true essential thing about Connor Kent as Superboy? You know, is it tactile telekinesis? No, it is not. It's that he's the clone of Superman and Lex Luthor, and that creates emotional issues for him. And so we get down to the core of what that character is, and we then build it back up. And we use many of the story ideas in various comics, but the things you have to remember is that comics, particularly superhero comics from Marvel or DC, these are shared universes, which means that over the years, they've had multiple writers, multiple editors, multiple artists, and multiple interpretations. And some of them fit together very nicely, and some of them you're like, what were they thinking? And some of them they're like, that was a great story, but wow, that doesn't hook up with what came before, let alone what might come after. And so you have to, in essence, prune. You know, it's a big, old shrub, overgrown, you prune until you get down to the root of the thing and then allow it to regrow again. Something like Reign of the Ghost, since you mentioned that specifically, we developed it as an animated series at DreamWorks, or I created it and developed it with a handful of people. We sold it to Nickelodeon, and then there was this other series that Nickelodeon also bought that Steven Spielberg didn't want to do. And so took his name off it, and then Nickelodeon realized that Steven could take his name off of anything at any point, and so they killed Reign of the Ghosts as well. But Jeffrey Katzenberg was who I worked with for 10 years, 7 at Disney and 3 at DreamWorks. Was very cool and sold Reign to me for $1. And I was able to write these novels. And so for the first novel, I had written an hour-long pilot script, which in animation in those days would have been a two-parter. And I adapted that into a novel. And I sent it around to a bunch of publishers, or my agent did anyway, and got many, many polite rejection letters. And, you know, it didn't sell, and I got a lot of advice from people that I didn't like. It didn't work for me, and I think that's another key thing, particularly in novel writing. You've got to take responsibility for your own work. I think this is true in all writing, though. You want to hear notes, you want to listen, you want to be open to them. But when push comes to shove, you've got to decide for yourself whether the note is worthwhile. Now, in television writing, sometimes that's not your choice. Even in comics, you know, you've got editors, you've got executives, you've got all sorts of people who may weigh in and say, this is what I think you should do. And you're like, yeah, I don't think that works. And they're like, oh, we don't care what you think. But in writing this novel, I was hearing this advice and I didn't really like it. And then I gave the novel to a writer friend of mine, Sam Bernstein. And he said, where's, in essence, Voldemort? Where's your big villain? You know, because it was planned to be a series of books. And I realized that that was what was missing, because in a TV series, I might not reveal that, because you've got weekly episodes. I might not reveal that for a handful of episodes. But each novel has to stand alone. And I realized that I knew exactly who the big villain was, but she wasn't in the first book. So I decided to rewrite it and add her in, and I did a very quick rewrite. It was very easy to just plant seeds of her, and then I got to the chapter where she really sort of jump out, and this was the first chapter in the rewrite where I was really going to be substantially rewriting, not just adding a little thing here, that kind of thing. And that was a little intimidating. So I said, okay, let me just put it down for a second, let me think on this, and then I'll come back to it. So 10 years later, and I'm not exaggerating, I got laid off from Warner Brothers after season 2 of Young Justice. And I was unemployed for 14 months. But I thought, all right, let me take a look at this book. And I pulled it out of the drawer. That's figurative, it's on a computer. And I looked at it and I thought, you know, I still really like this. Let me try again. So I started from, I didn't literally start from scratch, but I started to rewrite from scratch, and I went through, and again, I got to this chapter that was going to be a major rewrite, and I just did it. The whole rewrite took me 3 weeks, or 10 years and 3 weeks. On how you look at it. Excuse me. And I just let my own head get in my own way. I finished it, and there was an editor friend of mine from St. Martin's Press who I used to have, I used to see, he lived in New York, I live in LA, but we'd see each other once a year in San Diego at Comic-Con. Have breakfast, and he was the one guy who kept saying, have you finished the rewrite year after year? He's like, have you finished the rewrite? I really want to see that book. I'm like, yeah, I just have to finish. I don't want you to see the old version. I don't think it's quite working. But you know, when I get this rewrite, and every year you go, have you done the rewrite? No, I've been really busy on, you know, Young Justice or whatever. So I finished the rewrite and I sent it to him. I didn't even go through my agent. I just sent it to him. And for 2 weeks I heard nothing. I mean, not even like, I got the book, I'm reading, I'm gonna read it, or I'm busy, or something like that. I'm like, oh my God, he's been asking for this rewrite for 10 years. Now he's read it, and he doesn't know how to tell me that it's awful. But after 2 weeks, he called me up and he said, yeah, we wanna buy the book, and what I'd sent him was the book, the text of the first novel, and then it was planned as a 9-book series, and I just sent him just one paragraph on each of the next 8 books, so it maybe was just over 1 page till I think it went on to the second page, but it was basically the book and 2 pages that spelled out what the next 8 books would be in the most general terms. And he called me up and said, yeah, we want to buy the book and we want to buy the second one. I'm like, good. Suddenly I was a novelist, a published novelist. And writing the second book was interesting because the TV series was planned out as 13 episodes, because that, for all sorts of historical reasons, is 13 used to be the unit, before streaming, used to be the unit of measure of all television series. 13 or multiples of 13. But there were really only 9 Zennies. You don't know what that means probably, but if you read the books you'll learn. So again, books on sale at my table. Comes in.
It's really
But so I had to take 13 episodes and go, how do I make 13 episodes into 9? And so I took 2 of the episodes that we had planned and I combined them. And it was interesting because they actually intertwined. I was like, is this gonna feel like just 2 things shoved together? And they didn't. It wound up really intertwining very nicely. And again, it's one of those that I was talking about on Gargoyles yesterday. Sometimes things just feel right, and it feels like kismet or something like that, and the pieces all fall together. And again, a lot of that is thousands of index cards and moving them around all the time until you come up with the structure that works for you. So that became the second book, and then I had to adapt Reign of the Ghost for an audio play. And I wanted it to be unabridged, and so the only words I cut out were things like he said or she said kind of things, because when you've got actors doing the voices, you don't need to write down Joe said this. You just have Joe say that. But otherwise, I made it unabridged, and then again, you're sort of reverse engineering this thing. You're adding music, you're adding sound effects, you're directing the actors, and that was, doing that audio play was one of the most fun things I've ever done. And don't get mad at me, Jennifer, about it again.
I didn't say nothing.
I know. When you were thinking it, I could tell. Yeah, the star.
For those thousands of index cards, who retains ownership of those? Do you get to keep those? If you're a staff writer or writer for hire, does that belong to them? Especially the ones that are crossed out. What do you do with those?
I always keep them. I didn't keep them on Earthspark because I wasn't producing that show. I was just a staff writer. But if I'm the showrunner or the novelist or the comic book writer, I keep all those index cards and I keep them forever. And I don't know what else to do except keep them forever. If we're writing a TV show and there's a bunch of cards we don't use in the episode, we'll put them up on the board over there because we might use them later. They might come in handy. But anything we've actually used, they get clipped and they go in the file folder. And I now at home in my garage have huge bins that are just filled with clipped index cards. Lots of them, thousands and thousands of cards. I don't know why I'm keeping them, but I can't get rid of them. And even on projects that I don't own, of which are most of the stuff I work on, frankly, no one thinks at Warner Brothers or at Disney or at Blizzard or whatever to sort of go, and where are those index cards? And I'm like, fuck them, those belong to me.
10 cents per card from the office consensory.
Yeah, Phoenician?
Yeah. You've mentioned in the past that deadlines are a good motivator.
Oh yeah, I'm totally a deadline writer.
Which medium is least prone to procrastination?
Least prone?
Yeah.
I mean, none are well prone. Obviously, if it could take 10 years to rewrite a novel, that's pretty prone. But I think maybe the one I feel the most pressure for specifically might be a comic book, because I know there's an artist who, in other words, when I'm writing Spectacular Spider-Man now, I know Humberto Ramos, he sends me, every time he finishes a page, he sends it to the editor and to me and to the inker and to the colorist. And so I know exactly where he is on issue 6 when I'm writing issue 7, and I don't want him to finish issue 6 before I've finished issue 7. Which doesn't mean I want him to slow down. He's got his own deadlines, but it means that I've got to speed up to make sure that I stay ahead of him, because this is not a big machine. This is an individual whose livelihood depends on having the next script ready for him. So I feel more, pressure's not quite the responsibility with that, because it's an individual. On the other hand, I don't miss deadlines. I mean, if I don't have a deadline, or if I'm self-deadlining, I'm a disaster. But But if I've got an external deadline that's real and not made up, and that happens sometimes, even in a big company, they'll be like, the deadline for this episode is this, and you're like going, you know it's not airing then, right? It's not airing until September. Why is the deadline May? And you're like, well, or not me, but the executives are like, well, you see, if you don't finish this one by May, then you'll never finish the last one by December. I'm like, okay, I get that. And so this is a good target to hit. But if in fact we're 3 or 4 days late on this episode that isn't airing for 3 months, no one's gonna die. And if we need those 3 or 4 days, I'm gonna take those 3 or 4 days. They get very mad at me. And sometimes, you know, I ignore that. But on the other hand, it is a production. There are a lot of people being employed. Man hours matter, because that can send you way over budget. But if, you know, if your editor's on staff and he's, you know, you're in post-production and that kind of thing, I'm not talking about, you know, doing 3 mix sessions as opposed to 1. I'm talking about, no, we're just gonna spend more time on this. It's not gonna actually cost any more money. So I'm not gonna take an arbitrary date and destroy this episode just because you're telling me it's now or never. When I know for a fact that's not true. Yeah, there was Spider-Man. No, Spider-Man. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Spider-Man with the hashtag.
Right, yes, okay, so, how do you tackle writing for a video game?
So, okay, so I've written for some video games, and a little bit, not a lot, and it's still a bit of a mystery to me. Part of the problem is I'm not a gamer myself, so I've done voice work for games, and I've done a little bit of writing. On the Young Justice game, they had a writer for the game, and some of the stuff she wrote wasn't quite matching with the characters, so I do a little rewriting. They had this thing called Red Arrow's Diary, which, like, if you got to, I'm not quite sure how it works, but if you get certain achievements, you get another chapter or another journal entry from his diary, and I wrote all of those because it was just quicker for everybody for me to write those. And I've done a little bit of help breaking story for video games. I did a little bit of work at Blizzard, not much, very, very little. And then I used the index card method. And then, you know, I've written a few cutscenes here and there. And usually on those projects, it's kind of like piecework, so they sort of like, this is what we need this cutscene to do. And so then I write the dialogue for it and that kind of thing. But I'm not the best person to ask about video games, to be perfectly honest, because again, I've been I don't have enough experience in that area, and I'm very unclear on the overall process for writing a video game. Just because I haven't done much of it, and because again, I'm not a gamer myself, it doesn't come naturally to me. Whereas I am a TV watcher myself, that kind of thing. Yeah, here.
What was your solution for having to describe the same characters and locations in sequels?
Did you hear when we were talking about that earlier?
Maybe not.
Okay, so the solution was a lot of hair pulling. You know, a lot of frustration because I was really happy with how I described them originally, and then I had to find a new way to do it. And you just work it until you figure it out. You can sort of use a few of the words again, but if you can't use them in the same way, you sort of get to it.
Stroke.
Yes.
How many projects are you usually working on at one time? And I'm not sure if you can tell me if it's true, because I've heard that a lot of studios are shifting to try to do more contract workers as opposed to staff writers. Or like how exactly, like is it, will you be like a staff at one project and then when that ends you go somewhere else and do something different?
Yeah, I mean, when I started out at Disney, I thought my career is going to be here at Disney. I thought I'd be there my whole life. Not so much. I've worked at Disney, Sony, Nickelodeon, Warner Brothers, Cartoon Network. I've worked everywhere, and what tends to happen in television is that I get contracts that last for the run of a show, and thus when the show's over, I get laid off if it doesn't get picked up. And often I get laid off in between a pickup, like between seasons 3 and 4 of Young Justice, I got laid off. I just, as I said, worked on Transformers Earthspark from November to May, and then got laid off again because the writing on the season finished. For years, I was a freelance writer, producer, decades. I was a freelance writer, producer, and story editor, even when I was doing shows like Max Steel, Witch, Men in Black, and the first 2 seasons of Young Justice, I was freelance. I was not on staff. I would go into the office every day as if I was on staff, but I was paid by the episode. I wasn't paid a salary. For season 3 of Young Justice, which came 5 years after the end of season 2, I'm like, I don't want to do this. I want you guys to put me on staff, which they did reluctantly. And then for season 4, I was annoyed with them and I didn't want to be on staff and I wanted to go back to being freelance and they wouldn't let me. So this stuff comes in waves. There are times when, we're almost out of time, but there are times when studios are like, yeah, we want to staff up. When I started at Disney as an executive, my job was to find writers that we could put on staff. And then later it was like, why do we have all these staff writers? Let's go freelance on everything. So for example, Gargoyles, we had 4 story editors in season 2. Michael Reeves, who was the original story editor, Bryn Chandler Reeves, Carrie Bates, and Gary Sperling. Gary was the only staff story writer. Even Michael, who had been our original story writer, he was a freelance story editor. He was paid by the episode. Gary was the only one on salary, and the only reason that was the case was because Gary was already under contract at Disney, and whatever show he had been working on, and I can't remember now what that was, that came to an end, and he was on a time contract as opposed to a per show contract, which they almost never do anymore. So Disney's, I'm like, I'll take him, you know, but Carrie, Michael, Bryn, they were all on episodic freelance contracts. And again, after I left Gargoyles to go to DreamWorks, and then after I left DreamWorks, for 20 years or so, I was always freelancing. I got paid by the episode, not by my time. Yeah.
Just curious, when working on a movie, there's a leitmotif. Would, just in your mind, do you think leitmotifs are easier to work with instead of having to reascribe when you're writing the novels?
I think that it's definitely easier to write for the screen, whether TV or movies, because it's so collaborative. You have all these great people, incredibly talented people, contributing and helping you, and again, composers, artists, etc., actors. When you're a novel, you're a one-man show. I enjoy doing both. Part of your question I just remembered is, how many projects do I work on at a time? I like to have at least 2, because sometimes I run into a wall on one, and I don't have time to sort of wait 10 years to go back, but I can switch over to the other one, and then and generally speaking, while I'm not focused on the first one, somehow the problem gets solved when I'm not laser focused on the first one and I move to the second one. So what's been interesting recently, and again, part of this is literally a function of me getting old, but when I was working on Earthspark, full-time job as a staff writer on Earthspark, I was also writing 2 comic books, Gargoyle's Quest and The Spectacular Spider-Man. I had no problem making any of my deadlines. Then I got laid off from Earthspark when that season came to an end. And suddenly I'm having trouble making my deadlines on these 2 comic books, which is ridiculous because I was easily doing it while I had a full-time job. Now I'm just old and tired and I don't feel like working all that much. I know this doesn't answer your question at all, but it just became this thing where I'm like, oh my God, suddenly and thankfully again, I'm responsible enough that I don't want Pasquale on Quest or Umberto on Spider-Man to be without work, so I'm like, oh shit, I gotta catch up. But suddenly it was problematic because I had so little work. And I was just enjoying not working. When I was younger, I was so ambitious. I mean, I truly was phenomenally ambitious. And I was constantly working all the time. And now, I like just watching TV. It's tougher for me to get motivated now because I'm old and tired. Blaze?
Yeah. You interrupted yourself when you were talking about writing, I think Spectacular Spider-Man, and Marvel changed the page count in the middle of the process.
Oh yeah, that was a huge problem for me because I had already broken the book down as 22 pages, and suddenly they're saying it's 20. I'm talking about the issue when they made that change. And I said, guys, you're killing me here. I'm gonna have to rewrite a whole bunch of stuff and you're not paying me for that. And I went to my editor and I said, look, I'm a professional. Every issue after this can be 20 pages, but you're messing me up here by doing this midstream. And my editor's Nick Lowe, and Nick's a great guy, and Nick said, yeah, I see what you're saying, and he went and talked his bosses into letting me have 22 pages for that issue. By the way, that was not a given. I might have said all that, and Nick might have said, yeah, I'm really sorry, but Deb's the brakes, you know? And that would have been it. And you know, you're a professional writer, that's what you do, you make that adjustment, but it would have been really annoying to do that, because I don't like busy work. I'm fine with revising stuff to make things better, but if I'm revising because somebody changed the rules partway through or didn't respect the process, that annoys the hell out of me. Yeah.
You talked about rewriting someone's written parts before. Do you find it easier writing for yourself or coming in and having to touch up someone else's word? And what's the process of making sure the ship stays on course and follows the same narrative?
Yeah, so as a story editor and producer, I'm constantly rewriting either my own work or the writers working for me. One of the things that I try to do, particularly on Young Justice, is we do 300, 400 cards. What we did on Young Justice, which is very atypical of the industry, is I would write the outline. And then I would give the outline to the writer to write the script. And I would say, Brandon and I would say, look, Brandon and I have vetted this outline. We are really happy with it. We are not allergic to making changes, but don't change it just for the sake of changing it, and don't change it just to prove to us how talented you are. We already think you're talented, or you wouldn't be in the room in the first place. So, you know, bring this to life, add your own take to it, but don't mess with it too much. And if you really feel like you do need to make significant changes, then call me before you do that. And most writers respect that, and I get great stuff, and when it comes to revising their scripts, I have very little work to do. Very little work to do. And that's another thing. In my process, in television, the outline is the key step, not the script. Because if we don't have that structure right, if we don't have that outline down, the script is going to be a lot of damn work. But if we've gotten the outline clean and working, then the script is easy. And every once in a while, there was one writer I had who, very talented writer, but couldn't seem to get the tone of the show. And it was a lot of work rewriting his stuff. And the first time it happened, I'm like, okay, he wrote it, I did the rewrite, he'll read the rewrite, and now he'll get the changes I made. And again, really talented guy who I like a lot. So we gave him a second script, and again, the tone was really way off, and he didn't get a third script. But that's pretty rare. Generally speaking, we nail it in the outline and they deliver. And so my job is pretty easy. And in fact, the toughest thing I have is that Brandon is so much smarter than I am that he'd have these notes, and often it felt to me like he had more notes on my scripts than on the scripts written by the freelancers. And I'd be like, and I'd get frustrated mostly because he was always right. It was so annoying. But anyway, we are out of time. We're over time. Thank you so much. I hope we've got a radio play later today. I hope you guys come see it. It is going to be really ridiculous.